Well, friends, now we shall be dealing with the relationship between history and economics. You might have been, I suppose you might have been waiting for this to unfold before you, because history is very intimately connected with economics. And today, in our present lecture, I will let you know in what manner and to what extent history is connected with economics, or we can say the same thing in a reciprocal way, how economics is related to history. And here also I would like to say that sometimes our students do say, sir, is economics absolutely a new discipline? Then some will come with this, with another counter argument that look here, we had economics way back when Arthashastra was written. So, for as a word of caution, I would say that don't try to trace a discipline when it was not. Just now I told in my last lecture that how this gentleman Weber was given the chair of education, not sociology. Similarly, some scholars were given chair of law, not of sociology. So this kind of development is very gradual. And you might have noticed that whenever I am saying something, I also try to relate it to the context in which this discipline is, attracting the attention of the scholars. Economics becomes very prominent in the 18th century, because from 16th century onwards, the major developments were taking place in philosophy of science. I am not saying science, philosophy of science. And philosophy of science in turn attracted many scientists who started looking at the philosophy of their particular disciplines, philosophy of physics, philosophy of chemistry, these kind of things. So, in fact, instead of narrowing down their scope of their subject, they were broadening the scope of the subject by going to larger questions, the context in which the discipline developed. By mid 18th century, when we start hearing about Adam Smith's classic work, Wealth of Nations, Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, then there we come across a very serious attempt to understand, how the economics is operating and impacting history. He is writing about colonies and other things. Before him, say as early 17th century, when William Petty was dealing with economic things and how economy was influenced by history or the reverse way, William Petty found that he's saying that creation of capital is actually a creation of the labor. So from there you find this stream of labor theory value will start coming. So labor theory value will come, where you find that labor, the contribution of labor is underlined. By the time you come to Marx, Marx goes to the extent of saying that if you remove labor, all other factors which Adam Smith had identified, capital, building, tent, all those extra things, they will come to null. They will mean nothing. So until unless you have labor, production based on labor. Then Marx goes further, he speaks about division of labor and how division of labor led to specialization of labor. But Marx will take it further, he will give us the famous labor theory of value, how labor creates value in a society and ultimately it leads to surplus value. Then would come, other kind of scholars like, Goshen, then Jevons, Menger, Walras, and Bauer, and then Schumpeter. They would be challenging all these classic economics. They will be putting forward the theory of, marginal utility. So this is how they are trying to look at, how within the society economic factors are unfolding and how different relationships are being created because of these changes, which becomes little faster with the coming of industrialization. And by mid 19th century, you will find that industrialization has reached its peak, at least in England, and then it led to development of other kinds of things. By 1870, in European history, we witnessed a long period of depression, and this is called Great Depression, so which lasted for more than 20 years. Now, during that time, our economic thinkers, they started thinking that if capitalism was such a good thing, why it was not moving in a unilinear pattern? Why capitalism is not moving in the way these people had thought of? So they came out with marginal utility theory. Then Baumgartner will give the theory of roundabout production, and then ultimately Schumpeter will say something, and ultimately after First World War, Keynes will appear, and he will give us theory of employment and regeneration of a decaying economy. So all these major thinkers, it's very difficult to name all of them. They were actually dealing with the interaction between history and economics. History means the human being's evolution. So how it is being governed by, or to what extent they are impacted by the development of economics. Therefore, the relationship of economics to history is rather different from that of other social sciences. Curious as it may sound as I am saying this relationship in many ways or many respects comes close to that between history and literature. Economics, after all, is the science of the broad meaning of the term, of something which people actually do, and even if the science did not exist, people will still make economic decisions right from ancient times. Decisions, economic predictions, and participate in the various forms of economic organizations, which in part is the economist's function to describe. He will look into the factors why it is happening like this. Historian then is forced, whatever his period of study might be, ancient India, medieval India, modern India, or contemporary India, to have some rudimentary knowledge of economics. Basic knowledge of economics. It is expected of my students also who are attending this class, since so much of man's activity in societies is concerned with economic matters. So you are always dealing with it. In the same way, a historian seeks a thorough knowledge of any particular period must acquire a true familiarity with the literature of that period. It is like that. In the earlier part of this century, a century much preoccupied with the economic problems of the whole nations and all nations, and with the economic needs of individual men, it is probably true that most historians did possess some basic knowledge of economics as the subject was then understood. I am talking about early 20th century. In the amateurish atmosphere of the British and American universities, the subjects were in fact held to lie pretty close together, as we saw from the early career of J.H. Clapham. Economics in the last generation has become a much more complex and difficult subject, with economic theory heavily dependent on mathematics taking over from the old common sense approach. On the basis of the arguments at the beginning of this lecture, it should still be true that the historian today ought to acquire a basic working knowledge of modern economic theory. And here I would like to request you to read at least ever since Nobel Prizes were given for economics, read the press releases of those awards and of those scholars who were successful in achieving this milestone in their lives, much to our envy. But we can't get Nobel because there is no Nobel in history. Therefore, this will give you an idea of what I am saying, that your perception of economics will keep on changing, and the complexities with which the economics is facing nowadays, and how the fundamental parts of their foundational principles are being challenged or overstated, or made more clear by subsequent major economic thinkers of our time. So this is one very small way through which we can understand what are the things which are of primary importance for humans as well as economics at a particular point of time. So these kind of counsels which I was giving, such counsels of perfection must always be tested against practical utility, whatever may be the theory. If in fact historians did try to acquire all the skills which they ought, they would have precious little time left for writing and studying of history, and possibly lifetime also. So again, we come upon a necessary academic division of labor. We have already noted the evolution of the various sub-histories, of which economic history was one of the most important ones. Originally, economic history was distinguished from other histories more by content than methodology. Methodology is almost the same. As Professor W.H.B Court has put it, he's argued that economic history is that part of history, I quote, that part of history which requires a knowledge of economics, for its full understanding. So the question more and more economic historians are having to ask themselves as whether their primary loyalty lies to the history or to economics. They will have to find that out. As a matter of academic convenience, many university economic history departments now derive their main, function from being a service department of economics. I mean, most of this history of economics is being taught in Department of Economics proper, unlike in my department. In our department, we teach it separately within history. So, whatever be the immediate function, economic history remains a part of history, part of attempt to increase the understanding of the past, which is necessary to understand human society. Insofar as the line between the economic and general historian is not simply an educational and administrative device with which you can artificially divide the two, economic historians are historians who have deliberately decided to study one part of the history in general depth, in great depth. That depth to be obtained primarily by use of economic tools. Their conclusions must be served up in clear and intelligible form, understandable form, because they then be used by the general historian interested in the totality of the human experience in any given period of time. More usually, general historians will themselves be carried by the questions which they wish to answer into the territory where the possession of certain economic tools will be necessary. They will then be specific, and ad hoc purposes need to acquire them. The relationship between history and economics therefore take two rather different forms. First of all, we have the question of the borrowings. With the general historian from time to time, and economic historians of all of the time will have to make from economic science. We come upon the question of historians' use of statistics. I said mathematics will form a part of it. L forth counter, as Lefebvre said, which often it is a matter of more or less sporadic borrowing. Another obvious and absolutely inevitable borrowing is that practiced continuously by any historian who is concerned with 20th century history. It is impossible to deal with such crucial circumstances such as, say, the Wall Street crash of 1929. The policies of the New Deal, which came afterwards, or the world trading structure established after 1945 without knowledge of relevant economic theory. Under which theory it was built, nobody knows. So, even for the historians who still prefer great men to the nameless masses, it would be difficult to find a single more influential 20th century figure than the British economist J.M. Keynes, whom I was talking about just now. Different altogether from this fruitful idea of historical borrowing from economics is the question of the existence of two forms of new economic history deeply rooted in methodology of economic history, economic science. First, a form which has already gained wide acceptance and which is, which is concerned with concepts of economic growth and the study of national economic statistics in the aggregate. This kind of economic history was pioneered in the United States by no less a person than Simon Kuznets, the famous. It was due to his initiative that in 1950 the International Association for Research in Income and Wealth decided to embark on a series of analysis of the evolutions in national income, national wealth, their components of various countries. How in 1956 the Social Science Research Council was formed in USA. Recognition of the role of economics and relationship between history and other sciences created a fund to finance research on economic growth in various countries in the 19th and 20th centuries, which is still continuing till 20th century. So, these initiatives have been developed in France by Jean-Marc Zevsky, who had coined the not altogether satisfactory description, though, what is known as quantitative theory. How much, the quantitative theory will decide how much should be the quantity of a thing which they are going to discuss. So, Professor Maksymowski told us that, it differs from traditional history, economic history differs from traditional history in using a model consisting of quantified and interdependent magnitudes, the definition of which has been its origin in the national accounting. So, it not only ascertains the past evolution of the various aggregates, it also seeks to explain it. That is the fundamental difference. Professor Maksymowski finds the justification for the resort to national accounts in the growing interdependence of economic phenomena, which is characteristic of the evolution of modern society. But he makes no absurd claim for the quantitative theory. He says this is a perfect thing. Quantitative history should be written and understood. In one of his replies to Professor Leontief's criticism, he said that we cannot pass from aggregative concept to the economic phenomena as they have been directly observed any more than we can turn an omelette into the whole eggs from which it has been made. Is simply that no historical narrative can reflect the infinite complexity of real world. That is this. So, for Professor Maksymowski, true origin of all history lies in the appearance of new ideas and facts. And quantitative history is such a type. Perhaps the most important type of economic history and more common, more in circulation nowadays than 50 years ago. This has gained currency. So, in order to understand the totality of history, use of maths has also been, mathematics and statistics. These are the tools which are being used, increasingly used by historians. So, if you want to understand the totality of history, then it would mean that it will be expected of us, general historians will often wish to make use of conclusions and discoveries of the historians of economic growth, but they will not by themselves necessarily become familiar with the techniques employed by these historians. More controversial, in some respects more stimulating, is the form of economic history called, boringly, I would say, the new economic history.